Welcome back for episode 10 of Compound Growth. Today, we want to talk about a topic that has been in the news for months. I know we've gotten a lot of calls about it, especially in the last few weeks, but that is the IPO of SpaceX. So if you're not aware, IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. So we want to cover some of the basics, dive a little bit more in depth on some of the past IPOs, and see where else you can invest, besides just buying that individual stock. So, Mike, do you want to fill the viewers in on kind of what an IPO is?
Yeah, an IPO is essentially taking your company from a private company to a public company. So prior to the offering, the ownership of that company is only available to early founders, employees, and venture capitalists. So a very small group of people. The general person out there, you or I, could not invest in this company until it IPOs. And that means that the shares are now public and they're traded on public stock exchanges.
So a common question is, why would a company even IPO? They have their investors internally, like Mike said. They want to gain capital, continue to expand. These companies are growing fast, so they want to continue that fast growth. They want to gain credibility with the public and, brand awareness, and also let those initial investors actually cash out their positions and, gain net worth overall.
Yeah, and not all of the prior owners will sell their shares. So a lot of the early employees, founders, venture capitalists, they may retain a sizable position, but it provides them with the liquidity to do so if they want to get rid of some of those shares.
Yeah, it's a good liquidity event. I know we might touch on this a little bit later, but like with SpaceX, there's a holding time for those employees before they can actually sell their positions off. So, IPOs in general are pretty volatile. We see it a lot, in the past where a company goes public, it does really well for a short period of time, but there's a ton of volatility over that period. And then there's pretty substantial pullbacks. So I know we're going to get into a little bit of past performance of other IPOs. But my point being, that's a time, whenever that period ends of these initial investors that are now able to sell off their shares, there's kind of extra volatility at that point in time because so many investors are offloading shares to have that liquidity event.
So one of the reasons why the SpaceX IPO has been in the news so much is because of its size. So SpaceX was in fact the largest IPO in history.
Yep.
It came out at a price of $135 a share, putting it right at $1.7 trillion in market capitalization. So
Massive.
as many people have also heard, that made Elon Musk the first ever trillionaire.
Yep. Yeah. So with this valuation of 1.7 trillion, SpaceX is now the 7th largest company in the US. So it just, automatically jumps to top of the ranks.
Yeah, and you hear a lot about that too, is the Magnificent Seven, and the majority of those are tech stocks, and this one comes right in fashion with the other ones.
Yep.
So, Brody, what does SpaceX actually do? A lot of people might just think that they're launching rockets, could be compared to NASA in some regards, but what do they actually do? What's the bread and butter of their business?
Yeah. So there's kind of 3 arms to the business as a whole. So obviously they have the space division where they're, sending rockets up more than anybody else ever before. So I think that's what draws a lot of attention. They also have the connectivity side of the business with Starlink. So whenever we go out, we have a lot of clients in central PA. They live on the side of a mountain or somewhere where you normally wouldn't have great connection. Everybody out there has Starlink. So that's also gained a lot of tractions, not only in the US, but, in many countries where it's, you wouldn't expect to have any sort of connection. It's kind of the go-to at this point. And then Mike, they have also the AI arm to this as well.
Yeah, so a lot of people probably use Twitter, which is now X, also owned by Elon Musk, and they have their own AI similar to ChatGPT or Claude that is called Grok. So very similar. It's a chatbot AI system there. And then what SpaceX is also planning to do is figure out a way to put data centers in outer space. Obviously, there's a limited amount of room on our planet, and these data centers are large. They take up a lot of space. They take up a lot of energy. So putting some of those data centers in outer space where there's apparently unlimited room could be a really good idea and a very profitable one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think why this is so popular, one, because it's, one of the largest companies in the US and the largest IPO ever, but it's just an interesting company in general that it gains a lot of traction with, retail investors that say, it comes up in conversation all the time. They want to say, yeah, I have a piece of the pie. I have, a couple shares of it. I was included in that IPO. So it's just gained a ton of traction as, the process has moved along, and there's been talks of this for, years almost. And so it's like that conversational piece that goes along with it as well.
Yeah, and it comes with the fact that Elon Musk is such a public figure as well. Everyone in the world pretty much knows Elon Musk through all of his different companies that he has done, initially with PayPal, and then he went to Tesla, Twitter, which was renamed to X. He has the Boring Company, and now he has Starlink, SpaceX, and Grok as well. So, and he was part of the White House for a little bit. So, he's always been in the news. He's a very public figure, and people follow that. So when they're seeing these things, it just attracts more attention and more interest for them to want to go out and buy it.
Yeah, and one thing that I know we've seen more than ever before that you have to be cognizant of with, something that gains this much traction in the public is different scams that are out there. We've talked to countless clients that, have received mailers, gotten emails, phone calls, pretty much everything across the board of, do you want to be included in the SpaceX IPO? Send me over this information, whatever it might be. And a lot of these are scams out there. So not only do you have to be cognizant of IPOs in general being quite volatile and the risk that goes along with that, but also, all of these scams that are out there, phishing and people just trying to get your bank information. So for all the viewers, just be aware of everything that's out there, because people are getting more and more creative, especially with AI now, that you have to be extremely careful.
Yeah, and one of the other things that comes to mind while you're talking about that is in the crypto market, we have heard about these pump and dump situations where people will flood the market, increase the price, and then a lot of those bigger investors will get out, kind of pulling the rug out from underneath a lot of the people that got in a little bit later. Yeah, a lot of the retail investors. And people have mentioned that with this SpaceX IPO because there is so much attention, so much retail money in there. But I personally believe that there's enough institutional money backing that, and there's enough different funds, asset managers, venture capitalists involved in this that it's not going to play out as similar to crypto as people might think.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of institutional investors and, maybe investing outside of just individual stock purchases, I know we were talking earlier about some of the ETFs, exchange traded funds that hold SpaceX as a position that make up the portfolio. So rather than just buying the initial public offering or buying it in a crazy volatile time right after the IPO, you can actually hold SpaceX, get exposure to it without that being your only holding. So, in that general aerospace sector, you can get exposure to SpaceX without all of the risks that's involved with that.
So I mentioned a little bit earlier about the Magnificent Seven. So some of those giant
Major companies.
Yeah, some of those giant tech companies and how those IPOs have gone. So tell the viewers a little bit about what happened in those IPOs and how they eventually turned out. Spoiler alert, they're in the Magnificent Seven, so they've done pretty well.
Yeah. So the first one that comes to my mind is Apple. Almost everybody has an iPhone in their pocket, or you're watching this on an iPhone, an iPad, whatever it might be. So obviously it turned out pretty well for Apple. First day they were up 32%. So something similar to where SpaceX is at. And obviously since they IPO'd, They've done multiple splits. That's, an extremely
Share
good,
buybacks.
yeah, extremely good buy if you would have gotten in at the IPO. Microsoft, they popped off with 58% the first day. They're over a 3 trillion market cap as of today. So again, one of the largest US based companies. Amazon's the next one. So they popped off, day one of their IPO up 31%.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next point is that initial day or even the first several days, week, it isn't necessarily an indication of how it's going to perform over the next 6 months, 1 year, or even long term. There have been plenty of IPOs that have gone up substantially in the first day, and then we don't hear about them again.
Yep.
Conversely, you look at Amazon where it was up big day one, and then following that, it has a massive slide with the .com bubble, but it still turns out to be the #1 e-commerce business in the world, and one of the top companies in the U.S. markets. So with SpaceX, we did see major gains in the first week, but now we're in week 2, and I think it's down about 26% from that high point. So for investors out there, be cautious about buying on the first day or in the first week. In some cases, it may make sense to hold off and let the volatility settle down before you really become a long-term investor, because that's really what we believe in is long-term investing. We're not day trading. We don't encourage any really short-term swapping of positions. You want to be in it for the long haul to really build wealth.
Yeah, and you really don't want to be concentrated in any position, I would say, depending on where you're at financially in life, whatever it might be. You don't want to have over concentration in any one position, especially that being a position that's going through an IPO because of that volatility. As we said, these Magnificent Seven stocks, most of them had really good first days, but there was a lot of volatility after that with the .com bubble, which every company had volatility through that for the most part. But you have to be very cognizant of how much of your portfolio is this going to make up. If it's something that you really like or a company that you really like, great, maybe get some exposure, but you don't want that to be an over concentrated position.
Yeah, and at this point, it's still yet to be seen if we're in an AI bubble similar to the .com bubble. So in wrapping up this podcast here, we've talked a lot about SpaceX, some different IPOs. What's one IPO that you specifically remember or that stood out to you?
Yeah, one that, whenever SpaceX doing their IPO that came to mind was back in 2020 when Airbnb had their IPO. Pretty crazy time to IPO in general with COVID and whatnot. But for the Airbnb space, that actually worked out relatively well. People were traveling and, staying in, Airbnbs that were a little bit more secluded than, say, a hotel. But at valuation, they were at about 100 billion whenever they IPO'd. Since they've IPO'd, it obviously, like a lot of other IPOs, ran up right off the first few weeks, few months. But since then has fallen back down to levels just above where they IPO'd at. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it was available for the IPO, the initial public offering, at $68 per share. But at market open that day, whenever it was available to the general public, it was actually opening at $146 per share. And today it trades at $139 per share. So if you got in, pre-market, whenever it was IPOing, you would have made a pretty penny over that time period since 2020. But if you bought it in the open market that same day, whenever it did IPO, you would actually be down over this roughly 6-year period. So it's, always good to look at that long-term graph as well, that if you shrink it down, look at the first few months, that's great. You would have done fantastic if you sold out at the peak. But everybody knows it's pretty hard to time the market. So it's best to hold long-term. And if you did hold Airbnb long-term, it hasn't really worked out that well for you up to this point, but who knows what could happen, tomorrow and in upcoming years.
That makes me think about one big point here is that just because you're hearing about a company IPO doesn't mean you're getting a good deal on that company. It doesn't mean that you're buying at a lower multiple.
Discount.
It doesn't mean that you're somehow beating the system in any way. These companies are always subject to big ups and big downs. And just because a company's new and it's available doesn't mean that it's the right buy for you. So you always want to really do your research on these companies. And you've seen a lot of companies that have been public for a long time where they reinvent themselves, change their business model, and they become extremely profitable and extremely attractive buying opportunities. So it's not always about the initial public offering date. It's really about the fundamentals and how the company's operating.
Yeah, one thing that I'll compare that to that just comes to mind, because I, like cars, I'll compare it to vehicles. So think about whenever that new model comes out for a vehicle. This is the first time they change the body style, the engine looks great. Everybody wants to go out and buy it. That's the first time you're going to find out what kinks are wrong with it. So if it's leaking something, if it rusts in a certain area, they haven't worked out those details yet because it's the first time that this vehicle has been offered in that select style or model. But everybody wants the last year for that style or model. So if they keep that for 8-9 years and then switch it up, everybody wants that 8th or 9th year that they had it, because now they've worked out all of the kinks for that select style or model that came out. So I kind of compare that as, think of that 8th or 9th year of the vehicle as maybe more of a value company that pays consistent dividends out and has performed well over time, and they're relatively stable. And that first year that the vehicle comes out, think of that as an IPO. You have no idea what this is about to do. The engine could blow up or it could run for 300,000 miles. You have no idea. So again, be cognizant, because you just never know.
Yeah, at the end of the day, wealth is built slowly. It's 99% of the time not going to come from the newest, and 99% of the time not going to come from the newest company or the one that you're hearing about most in the news. It's going to come from slow accumulation of wealth, good business models, solid fundamentals. So as always, before buying anything, you're going to want to consult with your financial advisor and talk to people who are doing the research.
Yeah. Well, we talked a lot about IPOs, what they are, how you can buy into, SpaceX without buying the actual holding, and kind of what that process looks like. So hopefully you learned something today, and we'll hope you tune in for the next video.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.